Welcome to the Ironwood Strength Show, where the information is raw, unscripted, and unedited. Today, this is episode 10. I'm going to go over flexibility and stretching, and with the kind of an extension of the last two episodes in which I talked about GPP. Stretching, 90% of the time or more, it should be considered GPP. Okay, remember, I'm going to back up just a second ago, but remember, when we're classifying GPP, SPP, and SSP, we're looking at the different abilities and how they are related to the sport. Okay, sometimes you're looking at specific exercises, but always look at the abilities, whether it's maximum strength, max power, speed, flexibility. All those are different abilities that are being trained, and if they are an ability that can be utilized by many different sports, chances are you're in the GPP realm. And then from there, after looking at the ability, then you start to look at specific exercises, and then you can attach that to the sport as whether it stays in GPP or whether it starts to move more similarity, it'll move up to SPP or SSP. I have referred a few different times to the continuum, or to a continuum, in which you're looking at GPP being on the far left, SSP being on the right. And sorry about that camera movement. I'm going to show that continuum really quick. Okay, so here is a look at that continuum. Very simple. Probably didn't need a ton of video to explain it, but as you can see, GPP is on the far left, SPP is in the middle, SSP, or your sport-specific preparedness, is on the right. On the right, there is a solid line. That's because you cannot get more specific than the sport. On the left, there's an arrow, because you can continually get more and more general or unrelated to the sport, so that really never ends. Now, if you're also looking at it, notice there is space between GPP, SPP, and between SPP and SSP. That space should show that there is a range, that you're not just looking at things being this concrete, perfect set in place. It is only special physical preparedness and it fits right in that box. That's not the case. Sometimes it's in between SSP and SPP, or your special and your specific. It's in between, and it's a matter of how close it is to one or the other. The same thing between SPP, or your special, and your GPP, your general. Sometimes it's closer to general, but it's not completely general. Sometimes it's more general in nature, but it's moved down that continuum closer to the SPP range. So there's a lot of gray area, and you have to figure out when to apply what. And you know, if you're working GPP as a powerlifter, you're going to probably take that. You should take it all the way up to the competition, but when you get closer, some of that GPP may be in that gray area in relation to the competition. It's in that gray area between GPP and SPP. You might become a little bit more specific, so you're getting a little bit more out of it. Same thing with your SPP to your SSP. Getting closer to competition, you're going to be moving up that scale or up that continuum. It's still special, but it's getting closer to that sport-specific preparedness. Okay, so let's look at that a little bit closer in relation to flexibility. Okay, and I put together a piece quite a few years ago that really, it was a complete review of flexibility and stretching and the differences and what understand, stretching is not synonymous with flexibility. Okay, these are two different things. Stretching is the exercise, the type of exercise, and you got to break that down into multiple types of exercise that you utilize to produce flexibility. They are not the same thing. The flexibility is the ability that you're trying to train. Stretching is the exercise. okay, that you're using to get there. But I'm gonna be looking over that, so I'm probably going to be looking down a little bit. Still unscripted, still getting my own thoughts out there, but I'm going to be utilizing that to kind of keep me on pace. It's been several years since I looked at it, so it's actually been quite refreshing looking at it again earlier today and thinking about it over the past week. So first off, here's just a few comments that you may have heard most likely at some point in time, and we're going to look to kind of iron some of those things out and produce some clarity. So first, you should always stretch before practice and games. Okay, you should always stretch. Or, you know, the complete opposite of that, the other extreme, is that you should never stretch before practice and games. And you have coaches that kind of fall on both ends of that spectrum, and a lot of people kind of fall in between, well, sometimes this, sometimes that. But those are some comments that you may have heard in relation to stretching. Here's another one. Stretching improves performance. Or stretching hurts performance. I've heard both. Okay. Look at it this way. The type of stretching is important. Just go back to the continuum from general to specific. What are the needs of the sport? You know, and the certain types of stretching are more closely related to the needs of the sport than other types of stretching. So we're going to hit on that a little bit. Stretching prevents injuries, or stretching causes injuries. Okay, that's something that a lot of people don't like to believe, because it's been passed down for decades and decades that you have to stretch to prevent injuries. Well, that's only partially true, and we can get there's a lot of information out there that points to sometimes stretching does cause injuries, and probably the way most people do it is not that beneficial. So we're going to look at that. Stretching helps with a warm-up, or stretching does not help at all with the warm-up. Okay, again, let's look at the specifics of the actual exercises we're doing. Look at stretching as an exercise. Types of exercise, different exercises. Sometimes it does help with the warm-up, sometimes it doesn't. So we'll break that down a little bit too and go over that. First off, let's define, I guess not first off, because we've already had first off, but let's define flexibility before we get it too much into this. What is flexibility? Flexibility is simply the range of motion that can be displayed around a joint. Okay, that's really all it is. Now, you have to also look at what type of flexibility we're looking at. So there's active flexibility, there's passive flexibility. Okay, and a lot of people like to utilize the term mobility. Mobility is nothing more than active flexibility. What's active flexibility? That's the flexibility of movement. Okay, that's the flexibility that is displayed when you're going through different movement patterns or different movements, such as taking my arm all the way in a nice big range of motion. I'm displaying how much flexibility I have there. If I have to move my torso a lot, which I do, I probably am limited in flexibility in my shoulder. And I can feel that through my pecs, through my lats as I move that, as I move my arm around. Same thing with your hip joint. You know, you can kick your leg up straight in the air, kick it straight up in the air, and keeping your leg straight, and you'll feel that stretch in your hamstrings. Okay, if you just tried to have someone lift that leg in the air, it's probably not going to go as high, because now it's a much slower movement. Therefore, you do not display the same amount of flexibility. Passive flexibility. That is when you have someone else do the work for you, and you do zero work and let them move you. We used to do that when I worked at UTEP with the football players. I did it some with some of the other teams, but we did it with football a lot, where we would have them lay on the floor and we would do the stretching for them. They just laid there and relaxed, and we would put them through different movements. Some of it was static. which I'm going to cover here in just a little bit. But some of it was, sorry, I'm getting ahead because I'm getting into the types of stretching. But basically, the partner does all the movement. Okay, he does the movement. He's trying to do, they do the work. The partner does the work. The person being stretched just lays there and relaxes and lets that happen. So if the passive flexibility, if that partner can push you further or less, will depend upon how much flexibility you have passively. Okay, and passive flexibility is different than active flexibility because of basically the easiest thing to think about it is the speed of movement. If you have a greater speed, you're going to display greater flexibility. Okay, stretching is speed specific. Okay, that's an important thing to realize. Stretching is speed specific. So when you see stretching, we'll continue on that. It's gonna that comes up many times. So stretching. Okay, stretching is the exercise, which I've already said. It is the exercise that we utilize to train the ability of flexibility. Okay. Static stretching is what most people think of. That's when you just put yourself in a position and you hold it for 10 seconds all the way up to, some people like to hold it for a minute. Probably way excessively too long. And 10 seconds would be way too short. You're really not getting a whole lot out of that. But static stretching is just simply being in a position. Okay, being in a set position, or an extremely slow stretch where you might gradually increase range of motion over the course of 15, 20, 30 seconds. Okay, this can be done passive, which I'd already talked about, or it can be done not really active, but on your own. Passive would just be having someone else do it for you. Okay, active, you're doing the stretch on your own. So passive, you lay down, you have someone else put your leg up in the air and stretch your hamstrings. You have someone else pull your arms back for an upper body stretch. But there is no movement, okay, and that's key. Static stretching, no movement. PNF stretching, that's a whole nother ball game, but it would also be considered static because during the stretch, there is no movement. Okay, movement is important. Dynamic stretching, which I prefer the term active stretching over dynamic, because dynamic, people get to thinking the same, toy soldiers or dynamic hamstrings or walking quads, those same set stretches that have been preached for the last probably going back to the early 2000s, probably when they started really becoming popular. I'm sure they were around before then. But there's a set number of exercises that people look at as dynamic stretching. It can go beyond that because anything of movement should actually be considered dynamic or active. That's why I like to use the term active, because it should encompass all movement, not just those set dynamic stretches that we have in our minds when we think about dynamic stretching. It can also be done, dynamic stretching or active stretching can also be done passively. So you can go through those movements where leg swings, where you're just kicking your leg back and forth or swinging your leg. Or you could have someone else do that movement for you, okay, where you lay on the ground and your partner moves your joints or moves your legs or your hips and throughout maybe a circular range of motion. It can be straight back and forth, but the partner is doing the work for you, so it becomes passive. Okay, ballistic stretching, kind of an extreme form of an active or dynamic stretch, in which once you initiate the movement, and everyone wants to say ballistic stretching is dangerous. It can be dangerous, but I think the biggest thing we need to realize is that it's just another form done after a sufficient warm-up. Getting you to that point can probably be done safely, and taking care of making sure you know how to do it. So ballistic stretch is just a stretch where once the movement is initiated, you really don't have control over how far that movement goes. You're just going to let your body, you're going to initiate the movement very hard. You're going to let your body control how far that stretch goes. Okay, so now we've defined flexibility, kind of the different types of flexibility, and stretching, and understand that the difference is stretching is the exercise to train flexibility. Flexibility is the ability we're working on. Flexibility would be, you put it in those categories of strength, power, speed, those sorts of things. Flexibility fits right in with those. Stretching is what we utilize to improve that, to improve flexibility. Okay, is stretching necessary to improve flexibility? No, it is not necessary. Okay, they've actually shown that utilizing resistance exercise or utilizing strength training can have a greater effect on the static range of motion than stretching alone. So by training through a full range of motion, you can actually improve your flexibility around the joint by doing strength training through a full range of motion. So you have added resistance, which actually will probably help you go into a little bit more deeper range of motion or further range of motion than you could without that resistance pushing you there. So it has been shown to can improve your range of motion more than just stretching, and it will also help improve the connective tissue, or develop the flexibility of strengthen and help the flexibility of the connective tissues, for example, the tendons and ligaments. It would have a greater effect on those than just stretching. So it's not just that's strength training. There's other things you can go through as well to improve flexibility. Massage. Okay, massage is a great way of improving flexibility. The self-myofascial release. Okay, it's basically massage, but much cheaper and easier to get done. You don't have to have an extra person to do it. You don't have to go somewhere special. You can just do it on your own in your living room. But get on a foam roller. Utilize the tennis ball or a baseball to roll out your muscle groups. They have the stick. The stick is a great tool that you can roll your legs, you can roll your arms with, and they have other tools as well that you can utilize to apply pressure and loosen up that myofascial sheath, which will help improve flexibility. Okay, and remember, you're not just looking at the muscles in regards to flexibility. There's many other elements there that need to be developed, such as the myofascial, the sheath, the facial sheath, the ligaments, the skin, the tendons. They all have a role in flexibility, and stretching is not the best way to improve all of those things. So that myofascial sheath or massage can really do SMR, self-myofascial release, or massage does a great job at releasing that facial sheath covering the muscles. Can also be utilized, as you go through training, you develop stiffness. Sometimes you develop knots in your muscle. That massage, self-myofascial release can help break that up, therefore increasing the range of motion and increasing your flexibility. Okay, so let's get on to some of the more, I think, things where people start having problems with this, with what they believe in regards to flexibility. First off, does increasing flexibility improve performance? Because ultimately what we want as athletes always revolves around improving performance. Okay, whether you're a strength athlete or a football player or a soccer player, a basketball player, your goal is to improve performance. So does stretching do that? Yes and no. Okay, the common belief is that you have to stretch, i.e. static stretch, to improve performance, or you have to static stretch prior to games and all that. That's actually detrimental. Okay, wish I could get it through people's heads. Static stretching hurts performance. Okay, static stretching. Well, we'll go on later. That's just the start of it. Okay, static stretching hurts performance in the short term. So stretching prior to activity, static stretching prior to activity actually decreases force production. Okay, if we decrease force production, then we can't run as fast, we can't jump as high, we can't hit as hard. All the things that we want to do in sports are going to be diminished because our force production is diminished. It also diminishes the stretch reflex. Okay, stretch reflex, so where you have a fast, rapid stretch in the muscle, therefore allowing, producing the ability for that muscle to contract harder following that stretch. Static stretching hurts the ability to do that. Okay, therefore, it would actually be detrimental to performance because the stretch reflex and force production, both of those things, are so important in sports performance. Why would we want to take that away? Okay, we need to have those abilities. We don't need to have them cut short. Over time, we actually know that the static stretching will train the body not to utilize the stretch reflex, and it reduces the ability of the tendons to store elastic energy. Again, static stretching in that sense is detrimental to sports performance. Okay? So how would we want to stretch if we want to improve sports performance? Okay, we need to stretch actively. We need to stretch in ways that are going to correlate to the sport. Okay, so just look at the speed component of sports and the speed component of stretching. Okay, sports that are fast need to require very fast, active, dynamic stretches. Okay, just looking at the speed component alone. Okay, we can get into the movements of the sport, and I believe you should take that into account when if you're preparing a warm-up for a team or for an athlete. Take into account the sport motions that they're going to go through. Those should be incorporated into the warm-up prior to them actually participating in the sport, and you can do that different ways. You can be very specific, or it can be general. It should work, actually, their warm-up should work from a general sense where they're just getting warmed up, just utilizing movement, to creating those dynamics, to then those dynamic stretches, and then taking that to the actual sport movements. And that will prepare them for them actually stepping into their whatever drills that they need to do prior to the game or to practice. Okay, and that's just looking at specificity, and in that way, it does improve performance. Okay, now so we're going to move away from performance, and we're going to go to injuries. Static stretching. Remember that first page that I had, the first thing that I went over was those questions. Okay, the questions of, or not questions, but the statements. Static stretching prevents injuries. I can't believe how many times I've heard that, and I can't even more over the course of my athletic and strength training career. We've always been taught that. We were taught that in elementary school. Okay? Oh, we're going, and I don't know what elementary school's like today, but back then, we're going to do such and such game today. First, let's stretch. Okay? Find your spots, let's stretch, and they take us through stretches for the first 5 minutes or whatever, or 3 minutes, and essentially did nothing for us. But we had to stretch because we didn't want to get hurt when we went through those activities. Again, we believe it because it's been preached to us since we were in elementary school. It's been told that on down the line. warming up football players before practice or before games, I'd hear the football coaches saying it. Okay, make sure we don't want to get hurt. Make sure you stretch good, stretch hard. We don't want to get hurt. Well, that's completely not true. Okay, so let's look at some of the stuff that I have. For, you know, this is a statement by Mel Siff. This is a quote, okay? Flexibility is an essential component of all sporting fitness. Okay, so we know we need to train flexibility. Remember what I said, flexibility and stretching are two different things. Stretching is simply a tool or an exercise that we utilize to help develop flexibility. He goes on, there is no research which proves categorically that there is any need for separate stretching sessions, phases, or exercises to be conducted in order to improve performance or safety. Okay, there's no research. There's no research showing that static stretching prior to exercise decreases injuries or improves performance. Okay, we're talking about static stretching here. So why do we need to do it? Okay, think about what was said. We're talking about stretching not being that important to improving performance or decreasing injuries. We're talking about flexibility, but how we get there is not how we thought we needed to get there. Okay, stretching and flexibility are not synonymous. They are two different things. There are ways to stretch, dynamic stretching being one of those ways, or having warm-ups which utilize the sporting movements, and that includes strength sports that utilize the sporting movements to develop the flexibility we need to improve performance or decrease the injury rates. There is also, I did quite an extensive research of flexibility several years ago. I went through 8 years of journals of strength conditioning research and found zero research, that showed that static stretching prevents injuries. Okay, zero. So it really, these things really point to the fact we need to be questioning what we believe. I'm going to give a few books before I get to the end of this where I pulled a lot of information from, and I really recommend reading these or going through these books, because some of the books, this is just a couple chapters. Some of the books, it was the entire book. So, but I really recommend them for understanding flexibility and understanding the things that I'm putting out here right now, because I'm probably not going into the detail or I know I'm not, that these books went into. But one of those books was Michael Alter, and if you're serious about learning about flexibility, then you need to read this book. It's called The Science of Stretching by Michael Alter, and it's basically a textbook for a class, but it only goes over flexibility, and we're talking, I would guess, around 400 plus pages. That just, I mean, it really hits it from every angle you can think of, from the extreme scientific portion to the practical portion, and it's a must read. If you want to understand flexibility, it is an absolute must read. But he has a statement in that book that he talks about how there's an optimum level for flexibility. You don't want to look at maximum. Okay, so those coaches that are walking around saying stretch hard so you won't get hurt, injuries happen at both ends. So there's a continuum, or I guess a upside down parabola, or whatever you want to call it, which I'm going to show you here. That increased flexibility doesn't necessarily result in decreased rate of injuries. Okay, the same with decreased flexibility. Here, let's just show it and then I'll talk you through it. Okay, written up here or drawn up here. So you have your injury rate is the vertical axis. Low injury rate is down low. High injury rate is up high. That's pretty self-explanatory. Then we look at flexibility, and we see that from flexibility from left to right, low is on the left, high is on the right. Well, your lowest rate of injuries is actually in the middle, okay? In the middle, where your flexibility is optimum. Not high flexibility, not extremely low flexibility. If you have bad flexibility or very poor flexibility, you have a high injury rate. If you have too much flexibility, you're a very flexible person, you have a high injury rate. But everyone in the middle, that's kind of where we want to be, okay? In relation to, or when it comes to flexibility, is in that middle ground, the optimum level of flexibility. And I can tell you with complete certainty that in 17 years of coaching, when I had someone that was very flexible, much more flexible than the rest of the team, and you know, strength coaches and sport coaches are like, oh man, their flexibility is just so good. Well, no, it's not. It's too high. It's not too good. It's not good. It's too high. Those athletes got hurt frequently, okay, because they don't have the stability, or the I guess stability is the best word I can put out there, but they don't have the protection for their joints or for their muscles because they have too much flexibility, which is a bad thing. Now, the same thing said for those that have bad flexibility, which we've always believed, if you have poor flexibility, it'll likely get hurt more. And that can be true too. Okay, I'm not going to say that's not, but we really want to be in the middle ground. We're not we should not be striving to have these great increases in flexibility. Okay, unless it's really needed for certain individuals, just keep them where they're at. Maintain what they have. They're probably going to be good. Again, the right amount of flexibility is what's important. Stretching should be done, okay, but we shouldn't be doing stretching to take ourselves to a high level of flexibility. That would be counterproductive. Okay? We want optimum flexibility, which is probably where most athletes fall. Okay? Here's something from Thomas Kurtz. Okay, again, I'm looking at this thing that I put together several years ago. I'm going through it because the points in it are very good. Here's a note from Thomas Kurtz in his book, Science of Sports Training. Most injuries occur during an eccentric contraction in the normal range of motion. Okay? Muscle tears are the result of a sudden stretch that occurs at the same time as a contraction. That's what causes the muscle tear. Okay? And it happens within a normal range of motion. So it's what's going on between contraction and stretching, the eccentric, that causes the tear, not taking ourselves beyond a range of motion. So why do we need to stretch to be beyond a range of motion that we're going to be in when most injuries occur within a normal range of motion? Okay, with range of motions that we can accomplish all the time. Probably didn't see it because it seems to not be getting out there, but my last video, which I shot just a few days ago about me straining my pec, I wasn't outside a normal range of motion. It happened right as the bar came off my chest. I go through that motion every day when I bench. Okay, actually I was doing 3-board. I wasn't even, so it was in the middle of the range of motion. Okay, right after it came off the board, my pec popped. Okay. If injuries happen because you went outside the range of motion, and they do happen outside the range of motion, I'll hit on that in just a second. If muscular injuries happen only outside the range of motion, then how come so many powerlifters or even weightlifters or strength athletes suffer strains and tears during their lifting? Because you can only lift inside your normal range of motion that you go through all the time. Okay? Not outside the range of motion because you can't get there. Now, in other sports, okay, so that just backs up the theory that most most of those injuries are in a normal range of motion, why do we need to stretch to train ourselves to be beyond that normal range of motion if they're happening within the normal range of motion? Okay, now let's look at that just a little bit differently. What about sports what about when people get hurt in sports and they had went beyond the normal range of motion, such as in football when they get hit and they get taken out of a range of motion, and we see this especially in knees, they get outside of the range of motion that they should be in, or even in hips. Well, chances are when they get hurt there, has nothing to do with the muscle. We're actually injuring tendons or ligaments. Okay, so that's another ball game. Stretching isn't going to help prevent that thing. It's not. That's just from an extreme stretch of those tendons and ligaments. We don't want those tendons and ligaments to be stretched out. Okay, not in training. We don't want to do it ourselves, and we don't want it to happen in sports, obviously, because they are going to end up tearing. But stretching your tendons, your ligaments, those are plastic. Those are considered plastic tissues. They should have very little stretch. Okay, if they stretch too much, they become more likely to be injured. So we shouldn't be trying to take ourselves through those extreme stretches to stretch our tendons and ligaments, because we're weakening them. They're not going to return to their. Think about a piece of thin plastic. Okay, maybe cut a piece off of a 20-ounce soda bottle or a 2-liter soda bottle, and just have a thin strip of plastic. And if you stretch it, which you can do a little bit, okay, you can stretch it just a little bit. Probably need some clamps or something to put on it and pull it apart, and it'll stretch just a little, but it won't go back. Okay, it's not a rubber band. A muscle is more like a rubber band, where it'll stretch and it'll come back. That's how it's supposed to work. But a tendon and a ligament, once you stretch them, they stay where they're at. They're not going to shorten back up. They're going to stay there. And if you continue to stretch them, they're going to tear. Okay? They're plastic tissues. So they don't return to their normal resting length once you've stretched them out. Let's see. I think that's pretty much hit as far as injuries. So basically, if you're everything I basically just said, you're probably getting the thing that I'm extremely down on static stretching and really like dynamic stretching, because dynamic stretching correlates more to the sport. So yes, that is true, but static stretching is still important. Okay, we just need to do it at the right time. And I'm not gonna. Yes, you're probably thinking I'm gonna say do it after a workout. Yes and no. Does doing it after the workout benefit you? Yes, because it's going to be that first thing that can help with cell reparation. So it's going to help start to return our muscles to normal length, and it's going to help improve muscle health. A better time, though, is, so I had, I don't remember what year, but I had a couple coaches come to me, and they're all upset. And I said, we're working with this coach, this tennis coach, and she doesn't want us to stretch the athletes anymore. She wants them to stretch on their own at nighttime. And because they're like, she went to some conference, and that's what they're saying. And I looked at them and said, guess what? Your tennis coach is right. Okay? Which they did not expect me to say. So, and we talked about it. When you're all bound up and tight after a workout, that's not the best time to stretch. Okay? Because your muscles are tightened, they're going to try to resist that stretch. Doesn't mean you shouldn't stretch at that point. You can stretch at that point. Just keep it easy. Don't try to overstretch anything. But a better time, if we're actually trying to get something out of that stretch and maybe improve flexibility a little bit, and for overall muscle health, is to come back a few hours later or at night. And when I trained, when I was in my best competing, I would do this. I'd sit down at night before going to bed. I'd sit on the floor, or I'd pull out a chair, because some of my stretches involved a chair, or use the back of the couch or whatever, and I would stretch. for 15 to 20 minutes, going through different stretches. That is a much better time to stretch because now your muscles have relaxed and they can be more effectively stretched. When they're all bound up and tight, they don't want to be stretched. Okay? You can still stretch then, but a better time is later on. And actually, I would recommend both. I'd recommend doing both. So my advice to those coaches, and on a very practical line, is the problem with the tennis coach's plan is that the athletes aren't going to do it. Okay, let's just be realistic. When those athletes leave that workout, they are done working out for the day. And they might, just thinking optimistically, they might have good intentions of going home and later that night doing their stretching. But most likely it's not going to happen, or if it does happen, it'll happen for a little bit and then they'll quit doing it. So if they do need to get their stretching in, as a coach, do it after the workout. Make sure they get that in before they leave the weight room and take them through it. Okay, if you just tell them to do it, it's not going to be productive and they're going to skip out on stuff. So take them through it before you end. It's a good way to finish a workout, and a necessary way to finish your workout. And then advise them to stretch later on at night as well. Okay, but understand that that's probably not going to happen. Okay, so I pretty much already moved into... So let's get some takeaways here. And then I'm going to hit just a little bit different. So takeaways, static stretching. Okay. Static stretching before an event, practice, game, whatever, does not do anything to help warm you up. It does not improve performance, and it does not prevent injuries. Okay. If you want a static stretch, do it after the workout, and better yet, do it again later in the evening, okay, when your muscles have relaxed. Dynamic stretching does, because it involves movement, does help warm you up. Can, depending upon what you do, help improve performance. Utilize movements general to specific. As you get to the specific, utilize actual sporting movements that will correlate to the sport. Okay. Does dynamic stretching prevent injury? Only in the sense, in my mind, only in the sense that it helps warm you up because it utilizes movement. Okay, by getting you, instead of just going out cold, which is definitely something you don't want to do, it helps warm you up. It helps prevent blood flow, or to not prevent, helps to encourage blood flow, and will, in that sense, prepare your body for more rigorous tasks that are coming ahead. All right, now I'm going to go over an example, because I've said this before, not everything fits in this box. You can't just have this box and everything's perfectly inside it. Just like SSP, SPP, and GPP that I've been hammering these last three videos or discussions. Not everything's perfect. There is a gray area. Okay, so what happens with extreme cases? I had a volleyball player that had poor flexibility in her hips. One of the worst squatters I've ever seen. Okay, and this is not an exaggeration by any means. Okay, she had so much trouble squatting, and I'm not talking about a powerlifting style squat, which people with poor hip flexibility tend to have troubles with. I'm talking about the normal, full Olympic style squat where you let your knees go forward, you sit your hips more straight. They still go back, but more down than back. You're going to sit down nice and deep, hopefully well below parallel. to get full leg development, hamstrings, quads, everything. Also has great range of motion benefits. She couldn't do it. She couldn't get to 2 inches above parallel. Okay, parallel being the crease of the hip at the same level as the top of the knee. Okay, she couldn't get to 2 inches of that. She was above that. Well, we finally found out. I tried to get help with it. No one really ended up helping me. So through constant investigation, watching her squat, what we ended up figuring out, and taking her through different stretches, trying to figure things out, what we ended up figuring out is she had extremely tight hip flexors. And there were other hip mobility issues there as well. So we would take her through very intense static stretching prior to squatting. And I know if you're anti-stretching before lifting, you're probably pulling your hair out right now, just screaming, how can you do that? And everything that you just said about static stretching decreasing force production, static stretching making injuries more likely, static stretching doing nothing good before a workout. We had to, okay? There are extreme cases, and she was one of them. So we would do intense static stretching for her hips. We had a couple different stretches we would do that targeted the hip flexors in different ways, and some of the other muscle groups around there as well. And within just a few weeks' time, I believe it was 3 weeks because was what I had in my notes, she went from being able to squat no more than 2 inches above, or no closer to parallel than 2 inches above, to squatting about 5 inches below parallel. Okay? So yes, she had a 7-inch range of motion. Very tall, very thin volleyball player. Long, thin legs. So 5 inches below parallel is not usually that hard for athletes with that type of build to achieve. She had a 7-inch increase in range of motion. Okay, it was the only way she could squat is if we went through those stretches beforehand. Some days were better than others, but she knew she'd try 1 or 2 sets first. She'd come over to me, okay, we got to do the stretches. And we get those stretches in, and then she would go squat. So I do believe that there are extreme cases. There are times you need to look at what are the immediate needs, and sometimes those will override some of the things that I've talked about in this video. So she was one of those extreme cases, and it was a necessity to get her to improve strength the way we wanted. We had to target her flexibility with static stretching, intense static stretching prior to the activity. Okay, and I will say she was warmed up prior to us doing those stretches. She wasn't just cold, she was warmed up first. One other thing I want to point out is that a lot of times, many times, most of the time I would say, that the same factors that lead to decreased performance or injuries, I should say injuries, the same factors that cause injury prevention, that prevent injuries, are the same factors that, or are the factors that have an increase or improved performance. Okay, performance and injuries are related. Okay, if you want to improve performance, usually improvement or decreased injuries will come along with that. Improved performance, force production, decreased injuries. Increased force production will help decrease injuries. Increased stretch reflex, that contributes to decreased injuries, rate of injury. Okay, stretch reflex is involved. If you take the stretch reflex out, the stretch reflex is a safety mechanism. It's not a performance mechanism. Our bodies weren't created to perform. Our bodies were created to protect themselves. Okay, so stretch reflex and the stretch shorten cycle are a protective mechanism. but they also improve performance. Okay, these things go hand in hand, and we have to remember that when we're thinking about training. References, books that I highly recommend that you dig into if you want to understand flexibility. Michael Alter's book, The Science of Flexibility, is #1. That is the best book you can get. It is so comprehensive and so in-depth. I strongly recommend that book. The Science of Sports Training by Thomas Kurtz has a number of things in there. One of the best all-around books I can recommend. And 2 books by Mel Siff. One is Super Training, which, depending upon the version or the edition, may or may not include Yuri Verkhoshansky as a co-author. The book that I have, it was by Mel Siff alone. Of course, a lot of the stuff was brought over from Verkhoshansky, but that specific book, Mel Siff was the only author listed. And his other book, The Facts and Fallacies of Fitness. Okay, those are 2 excellent books by him. All 4 of those books that I just listed, I highly recommend for learning about flexibility and stretching and how they relate to training and how they should be utilized. That is it for today. Tune in again next week for the Ironwood Strength Show. Remember, if you like this video, please hit the like button, please subscribe to the channel, and please share it with your friends, send it to them, recommend it to them so they can check it out as well. Till next time, see you later.